Hey everyone, this is for world history, so if you're looking for U.S. history, this is not the place to be. We're going to continue talking about the czars of Russia, the leaders of Russia. Excuse me. Today we're going to talk about the Empress of Russia, Catherine the Great. So Catherine the Great, also known as Catherine II, was originally Princess Sophie Frederick August of Anhalt-Zerbst from Prussia. At age 14, she was chosen to be the wife of Karl Ulrich, Duke of Holstein-Gottorp, grandson of Peter the Great, and heir to the throne of Russia as the Grand Duke Peter III. In 1744, Catherine arrived in Russia, assumed the title of Grand Duchess Catherine Alexeyevna, and married her young cousin the following year. Russia at the time was ruled by Peter the Great's daughter, the Empress Elizabeth, whose 20-year reign greatly stabilized the monarchy. Catherine, however, would not have become empress if her husband had been at all normal. He was extremely neurotic, rebellious, obstinate, perhaps impotent, nearly alcoholic, and most seriously a fanatic worshipper of Frederick II of Prussia, the foe of the Empress Elizabeth. Catherine, by contrast, was clear-headed and ambitious. Her intelligence, flexibility of character, and love of Russia gained her much support. Although a woman of little beauty, Catherine possessed considerable charm, a lively intelligence, and extraordinary energy. During her husband's lifetime alone, she had at least 3 lovers. If her hints are to be believed, none of her 3 children, not even her parent Paul, was fathered by her husband. Her true passion, however, was ambition. Since Peter was incapable of ruling, she saw quite early the possibility of eliminating him and governing Russia herself. The Empress Elizabeth died on December 25, 1761. While Russia was engaged in a 7 years' war against Prussia. Shortly after Elizabeth's death, Peter, now emperor, ended Russia's participation in the war and signed an alliance with Frederick II of Prussia. He made no attempt to hide his hatred of Russia and his love of his native Germany, discrediting himself endlessly by his foolish actions. Catherine had only to strike. She had supported the army, especially the regiments in St. Petersburg, where Grigory Orlov, her lover, was stationed. The court and public opinion in both capitals, Moscow and St. Petersburg. She was also supported by the Enlightenment elements of aristocratic society. Since she was known for her liberal opinions and admired as one of the most cultivated persons in Russia, on June 28, 1762, she led the regiments that had rallied to her cause into St. Petersburg and had herself proclaimed empress and autocrat in the Kazan Cathedral. Peter III abdicated and was assassinated 8 days later. Although Catherine probably did not order the murder of Peter, it was committed by her supporters, and public opinion held her responsible. In September 1762, she was crowned with a great ceremony in Moscow, the ancient capital of the Tsars, and began to reign that would span 34 years of the Empress in Russia under the title Catherine II. Since her early days in Russia, she had dreamed of establishing a reign of order and justice, and spreading education, creating a court to rival Versailles, and developing a national culture that would be more than an imitation of French models. Her most pressing practical problem, however, was to replenish the state treasury, which was empty when Elizabeth died. This she did in 1762 by secularizing the property of the clergy, who owned 1/3 of the land and serfs in Russia. Before her ascension to power, Catherine had planned to emancipate the serfs, on whom the economy of Russia, which was 90% agricultural, was based. The serf was the property of the master, and fortune of the noble was evaluated not in the lands but in the souls he owned. When confronted with the realities of power, however, Catherine saw very quickly, the emancipation of serfs would never be tolerated by the owners, whom she depended on for her support, and who would throw the country into disorder once they lost their own means of support. Reconciling herself to an unavoidable evil without much difficulty, Catherine turned her attention to organizing and strengthening a system that she herself had condemned as inhumane. She imposed serfdom on the Ukrainians, who had until then been free. By distributing the so-called crown lands to her favorites and ministers, she worsened the lot of the peasants, who enjoyed a certain amount of autonomy. At the end of her reign, there was scarcely a free peasant left in Russia, and because of the more systematized control, the condition of the serfs was worse than it had been before Catherine's rule. In 1764, she resolved the problems of Poland, a kingdom lacking definite boundaries and coveted by three neighboring powers, by installing one of her own lovers, Stanislaus Poniatowski, a weak man entirely devoted to her, as King of Poland. In 1774, the year of Russia's defeat of Turkey, Gregor Potemkin, who had distinguished himself in the war, became Catherine's lover, and a brilliant career began for this official as minor nobility, whose intelligence and abilities were equaled only by his ambition. He was the only one of Catherine's favorites to play an extensive political role. The annexation of Crimea from the Turks in 1783 was Potemkin's work. Through the annexation and acquisition of territories of the Crimean Khanate, which extended from the Caucasus Mountains to the Bug River in southwest Russia, Russia held north shore of the Black Sea and was positioned to threaten the existence of the Ottoman Empire, to establish a foothold in the Mediterranean. Russians, even Soviet Russians, continue to admire Catherine, the German, the usurper, and regard her as a source of national pride. Non-Russians' opinion of Catherine is less favorable because Russia, under her rule, grew strong enough to threaten the other great powers. And because she was, in fact, a harsh and unscrupulous ruler, she figured that the West's imagination and the incarnation of the immense, backward, yet forbidding country she once ruled. One of Catherine's principal glories is to have been a woman who, just as Elizabeth I of England and Queen Victoria gave their names to the periods of history, became synonymous with the decisive epoch in the development of her country. At the end of her reign, Catherine claimed that she had organized 29 provinces under her administration reform plan. An uninhibited splendor. She invested funds in many projects. More than 100 new towns were built. Old ones were expanded and renovated. As commodities were plentiful, trade expanded and communications developed. These achievements, together with the glory of military victories and the fame of her brilliant court, to which the greatest minds of Europe were drawn, have won her a distinguished place in history. Okay, so after this reading, you take a read this. There are 4 questions. You may use bullet points on number 1 and number 3. Make sure for number 1, you're doing 3 factors. For number 3, let's do at least 4 achievements, okay? 4 bullet points, okay? For number 4, you may have to look up Elizabeth I of England to get some idea of what she did, to compare and contrast her with Catherine. So take a read of this, and then to do the 4 questions, make sure you answer in complete sentences. Make sure you fill out the attendance form. Also, remember to use the text box on course in order to write on the document, okay? Otherwise, have a great weekend, and I will see you next week.